It's a great question. When did our modern world actually begin? Well, a lot of people point to this incredible period between the 14th and 17th centuries in Europe. It was this explosion of creativity, right? A cultural rebirth that just turned everything on its head. Art, science, politics, even how we think about what it means to be human. So what was the spark? What set it all off? Let's dive in and find out. The guy who actually coined the term the Renaissance was a 19th century historian named Jacob Burckhardt. And honestly, this quote gets right to the heart of it all. See, after a long, long time where life was seen mostly through a religious lens, this totally radical new idea started to take hold. The idea that human beings, you and me, as individuals, had this massive potential just waiting to be unlocked. So here's the plan for our explainer. We're going to start where it all began, with the unique situation in Italy that lit the fuse. Then we'll get into the big ideas of humanism, see how that exploded into art and new technology, and then watch as this new way of thinking challenged, well, pretty much everything. And at the end, we'll even ask, is rebirth really the right word for it? Right, so a movement this huge had to start somewhere. And the stage was set, not in some massive kingdom or empire, but in the bustling, competitive, and kind of chaotic city-states of Italy. Okay, what's so fascinating here is the contrast. While most of Europe was locked into this feudal system with kings and one central church power, Italy was just different. It was this patchwork of independent states, Florence, Venice, Rome. And it turns out this political messiness was actually its greatest strength. Because these cities were doing their own thing, a whole new culture had room to grow. They were these massive hubs for international trade, which brought in not just money, but new ideas from all over. They were run by super-rich merchant families who were fiercely proud of their cities and always trying to one-up their rivals. And how did they do that? By pouring money into art and learning and basically becoming the biggest patrons the world had ever seen. So you have all this money, all this competition. How does that turn into new ideas? Well, it created the perfect environment for a revolutionary intellectual movement that would come to define the entire era, humanism. At its heart, humanism was all about looking to the past to make the present better. These scholars, the humanists, they believed that the absolute best way to live a full life was to read and discuss the great works of ancient Greece and Rome, and that was a huge, huge shift away from focusing only on religious texts. And this right here shows you just how massive that change in mindset was. I mean, think about it. The medieval worldview was all about God, scripture, the afterlife. Your place in the world was pretty much set for you by the church. But humanism? It just flipped the script completely. Suddenly the focus was on humanity, on what you could achieve right here, right now, in this life. It was all about using your own reason and embracing debate. But hang on, where did they get all these lost classical texts? Well, a lot of them weren't lost at all. For centuries, they'd been carefully preserved, translated, and studied by Arab and Persian scholars. I'm talking about brilliant minds like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, who kept the flame of Greek philosophy, medicine, and math burning bright. They're the ones who reintroduced works that became the very foundation of humanist thought. Now, humanism wasn't just some dusty philosophy for academics. No way. It exploded into public life, giving us some of the most jaw-dropping art ever made, and it got a massive boost from a world-changing new technology. I mean, just look at this. Look at the raw human emotion, the incredible realism in Michelangelo's Pieta. This is humanism carved right into marble. Artists weren't just creating flat, symbolic religious pictures anymore. They were becoming scientists, studying anatomy and perspective to capture the beauty and the realness of the human body. The amazing German artist Albrecht Dürer put it perfectly. He said art isn't just some magical thing that appears out of nowhere. It's something that's already hidden inside nature. And the artist's job, through skill and observation, is to pull it out, to extract it. And all of this gave rise to this new ideal, the Renaissance man. Someone who could do it all. Someone with endless curiosity. And nobody embodies that more than Leonardo da Vinci. The man was an unbelievable painter, sure, but he was also a genius engineer, a musician, an anatomist. He was the living, breathing proof of the humanist idea that you should develop every part of your potential. Okay, and then, boom, the one invention that basically put the whole movement into hyperdrive. You have to understand, before Gutenberg, a book took forever to make. Like a monk might spend a whole year hand copying just one.
The printing press meant you could make hundreds of copies in a fraction of that time. It was a total game changer. All of a sudden, knowledge wasn't just for a select few locked away in monasteries. Ideas could now spread like wildfire.
Now, you can probably guess what happens next. When new ideas spread that fast, they're bound to smash into the old power structures. And the humanist drive to question everything was about to have a major collision with the two biggest pillars of the medieval world: the authority of the church and the way everyone understood the universe itself.
And here you see how this new spirit of questioning created two very different but equally world-changing figures. In religion, you have Martin Luther, who used humanist methods, going back to the original texts, to challenge the Catholic Church. And over in science, you have Nicolaus Copernicus, who used that humanist focus on observation and math to challenge a 1,500-year-old belief that the Earth was the center of everything.
Yeah, people had been unhappy for a while. A lot of humanists were openly criticizing the church for being corrupt, especially for things like selling indulgences, which were basically get-out-of-hell-free cards. In 1517, Martin Luther finally lit the fuse, and the Protestant Reformation exploded. At its core was a very humanist idea that people should have their own personal connection to God. And thanks to the printing press, they could finally read the Bible for themselves in their own language. At the exact same time, another massive revolution was brewing in science. The traditional view, the one backed by the church, said a stationary Earth was at the center of God's creation. But Copernicus, using math, proposed a sun-centered system. It was a completely shocking idea, but later, when people like Kepler and Galileo backed it up with observations, it marked a huge shift from just accepting truth from authority to demanding truth based on actual evidence.
So, after all that, this whirlwind of revolution in art, science, and religion, let's go back to where we started. Is Renaissance, this idea of a rebirth, even the best way to describe what was going on?
This is the big question that historians are still debating today. You know, the story of Europe suddenly waking up from a long, dark age sounds great, it's very dramatic, but the real story is, well, it's a bit more complicated. And what's really cool is seeing how our view of this time has changed. Burckhardt's classic take was all about a sudden, sharp break with the past, but historians today see it more as a gradual transition. They point out that the Middle Ages weren't really dark at all, and that this wasn't just some isolated European story. It was deeply connected to what was happening in the rest of the world. But if you had to pick one change that was absolutely revolutionary, it might just be this one. During this period, the modern idea of the individual started to take shape. The idea that you weren't just defined by your job or your family or your town, but that you also had a private, internal life that was uniquely yours. So, these changing cultural traditions, whether you call it a rebirth or a transition, there's no question they laid the groundwork for the modern world. They completely reshaped our art, our science, our politics, and our very sense of who we are. In the end, how we talk about history really matters. Calling it a Renaissance gives it this incredibly powerful and inspiring story. And that just leaves us with one final thought. What huge shifts in technology, culture, and thinking are happening all around us right now that historians of the future might look back on and call a rebirth for our time?